The Battle of Hastings is considered one of the most famous battles in all of English history. One of the central figures who kick-started the events that would lead to the Battle of Hastings was Edward the Confessor, King of England, whose life is a good story in itself. As understanding Edward's background in life, it's a surprise he was even king, as in 1016 England was conquered by Canute the Great, who established the North Sea Empire. Canute had defeated Edward's brother, Edmund Ironsides, at the Battle of Hasting. With this victory, England was split in half for a short period, as Edmund died shortly after the battle, leaving Canute the sole ruler of England. Edward and the rest of his family were in exile in Normandy. However, Edward's mother, Emma of Normandy, soon married Canute, whether to protect her son's potential throne or knowing Canute needed some legitimacy by binding his dynasty with hers. Yet Canute died in 1035, and within the next few years, his sons and heirs also died, leaving Edward the sole ruler of England in 1042. All of England's nobles supported the return of an Anglo-Saxon king, despite Edward living in Normandy for 25 years, no doubt being influenced by the culture there. Edward's most powerful supporter in England was the Earl of Wessex, Godwin, and he soon arranged the marriage of his daughter to Edward, as Edward's initial position on the throne was weak, as he had to rely on several earls for influence. The Godwins quickly grew in power, with many of the sons of Godwin being granted earldoms in southern England. Moving forward to 1050, and Edward, now being in his mid-40s and still without an heir, is creating tensions between him and the Godwins. The main event that turned Edward against most of the Godwins was the position of Archbishop of Canterbury, as when Archbishop Edgsige died, the Godwins sought to place one of their own in the position. However, Edward chose a candidate that wasn't exactly popular with the nobility or people. At least that's what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles tell us. Whatever the case, Edward's choice was a Norman called Robert, and through Robert, Edward offered the Duke of Normandy, William, the offer to be the heir to the English crown. Edward chose William for several reasons. One, they were related through Edward's mother's brother, the grandfather of William, Richard II of Normandy. Secondly, Edward knew William would make an effective king, as William had defeated many challenges to his rule, most notably his cousin at the Battle of Valles Dunes, and could be counted on for strong leadership. This certainly didn't go down well with the Godwins, and a further strain on the Godwins' relationship with the king occurred shortly after, with the arrival of Count Eustace, as while travelling through Dover with his retinue, he became involved in a fight with the local occupants, with both sides losing men. And as Dover was part of Godwin's earldom, King Edward demanded Godwin extract justice from the local townsfolk. However, Godwin was still angry with Edward over his choice of archbishop and heir, and conflict seemed inevitable when Godwin started to raise his forces. Civil war looked likely. However, Godwin's support collapsed as quickly as it had been raised, and he was forced to flee to Flanders with his family. Yet, negotiations between the Godwins and the king quickly took place, and within a year the Godwins returned to England, fully restored with all of their lands returned to them. Godwin died in 1053 and was succeeded by his eldest son, Harold Godwinson, who was just as ambitious and powerful as his father had been. Harold wasted no time in trying to convince Edward to renounce his choice of heir. However, Edward countered by sending Harold to Normandy in 1064, whether to confirm fealty to William as heir to the English crown, or perhaps to negotiate the return of some of Harold's family that were being held hostage there. The sources differ on the reasons Harold went to Normandy. Unfortunately, Harold was soon shipwrecked off the coast of Normandy. And captured shortly after, but was later rescued by William's men. The Bayeux Tapestry, a Norman source, tells us that Harold was given weapons and gifts, then swore an oath on holy relics to support William and confirm him as heir to the English throne. Harold being in a rather precarious position, agreed and swore the oaths. Harold soon returned to England, and by the end of 1065, Edward was close to death. And on the 5th of January 1066, Edward the Confessor died. Whether Edward changed his mind about the succession, or designated Harold to be regent until William arrived, is unknown. But the reasons why are immediately negated, as Harold was crowned King of England the next day. All the players in this Game of Thrones soon started to prepare their military, Harold calling forth all men to rally to him and to wait for the arrival of the Normans, as Harold knew William was preparing a fleet to invade England with. Harold's forces waited throughout the campaigning months, but there was no sign of William's forces. And by September, Harold dispersed his men back to their homes and farms. But to Harold's complete surprise, another invasion of England was underway in the north, near the city of York. As Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, claimed the English throne through an agreement by Canut's son, Harthcanut. After reassembling his army, Harold marched immediately north, reaching York from London in 4 days. An impressive feat that helped him surprise the Norwegians, as a good portion of their troops were scattered around the surrounding area. This surprise attack, combined with the Norwegians' lack of equipment and men, enabled the English to decisively defeat Harald Hardrada's forces. Himself being killed in the midst of the battle, along with Harold Godwinson's traitorous brother, Tostig. The majority of the Norwegian army was destroyed. However, Harold's own army still suffered significant casualties, yet it was still a great victory for Harold. But despite this victory, a few days later news reached the victorious king that Duke William has landed in Pevensey Bay off the coast of Kent with a substantial army. Harold cut short his celebrations and organised his army to convene at London, replenishing his forces there for a month, which also gave time for William to fortify his position at Pevensey. Harold, knowing that the longer he waited, the more fortified Pevensey would be, and William, being a seasoned commander, knew to wait for Harold's forces to arrive, which would allow him to protect his fleet, as well as the added bonus of his troops being fresh, and the English troops being exhausted from the long march from London. Harold would indeed force march his troops, and by the 13th of October 1066, the English were only 1 day away from William's position, hoping to catch the Normans off guard just as they had caught the Norwegians a few weeks earlier. However, William had scouts littered all around the area, and after being informed of Harold's incoming position, William rallied his men and marched towards Harold's army. On the dawn of the 14th of October 1066, the two sides met. Harold had positioned his forces along the top of a ridge, with his flanks being protected by the nearby woods, and placed his entire army in a long shield wall formation. Harold's plan was to wear the Normans down and hold his defensive position until potential reinforcements could arrive. William, upon seeing the deployed Saxons atop the ridge, organised his army into 3 divisions: archers in the front, infantry in the second line, and cavalry in the third. His main priority was breaking the Saxon shield wall, which would be a difficult task, as well as the added potential of reinforcements for Harold later in the day. But now let's look at each side's unit composition. Harold's Anglo-Saxon army was predominantly infantry, and a mixture of different infantry, comprised in a shield wall. The most professional of these units were the Saxon housecarls, professionally trained soldiers of the Anglo-Saxons, equipped with a Danish axe and sword, a kite-shaped shield, and armoured in heavy chainmail. these men would fight to the death for their king. The second type of infantry was called Fyrd, free men who came from the shires of England. These men, unlike the housecarls, were not professional warriors and had to supply their own equipment. The common consensus is that they were equipped with a shield and spear, with little to no armour, but with some having projectiles. The size of the Anglo-Saxon army was around 7,000 to 8,000 strong. William's Norman army was a truly professional army and featured a good range of units, including archers, heavy infantry from various parts of northern France, as well as spearmen, and of course the famous Norman knights, professionally trained soldiers from boyhood, equipped with a sword, shield and lance, protected by a hauberk shirt with a conical helmet protecting the face. The size of the Norman army was around 10,000 to 12,000 strong. With both sides' battle lines drawn, the battle began with William sending his archers to harass the Saxon shield wall, the archers firing volley after volley at the Saxons, but due to the high ridge, as well as the density of the shield wall, most of the arrows failed to reach their mark, or simply bounced off the shield wall. Realising that the arrows had little to no effect, William ordered his infantry to attack the shield wall, and as his infantry approached, the English peppered them with projectiles, before bitter hand-to-hand fighting began. The fighting lasted for hours, but the Norman infantry couldn't make any impact into the shield wall. William then ordered his cavalry to charge into the English ranks to support his infantry. However, the devastating charge of William's heavy cavalry was reduced, as charging up a hill and into a structured shield wall would still leave the fighting even between both sides. But as the fighting carried on, casualties on both sides began to mount, with some sources reporting that the fighting was so compact that the dead couldn't fall to the ground. But the Normans were making some gains, as the Saxon housecarls that were killed were being replaced by the lesser Fyrd units. But at some point during the battle, William's horse was killed under him, leading to a rumour throughout the battlefield that he had died. This caused his left flank to retreat, leading to the English to chase after them, but William quickly rallied his left flank by revealing that he was still alive. His units reformed and turned on the English. As they were cut off from the rest of their army, they were soon surrounded and killed. The Normans continued a tactic of feigning retreat in order to draw more English out of the shield wall. With gaps now formed in the shield wall, William ordered the rest of his army to push hard into the opening ranks, while Harold ordered his remaining troops to reform and hold fast. But pressure from the left and front soon gave way for English casualties to rise. Before long, Harold's brothers were killed. The battle that had been waging for hours was coming to an end. Harold was struck in the eye by an arrow. While shouting in mortal pain, he was cut down, either by one or several Norman knights. The news of Harold's death quickly spread, with the Fyrd units fleeing, but the remaining Saxon housecarls gathered around Harold's body and fought to the death. With the death of the last Anglo-Saxon King of England, William quickly marched towards London, and on Christmas Day 1066 was crowned King William of England.